moment. Please stay tuned. We're having some technical difficulties, so we appreciate your patience. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the webinar, Embracing the Future, How Technology Can Reduce Social Isolation Among Older Adults. We are thrilled to present this innovative session where we have gathered some of the leading experts on this topic of the intersection of older adults and technology. My name is Leah Bergen, and I am the project manager at the Center for Advancing Holocaust Survivor Care. It is through the Jewish Federations of North America that hosts our center. So the goals of the center are to promote person-centered, trauma-informed innovations for Holocaust survivors and other older adults who have experienced trauma. We also are building the national capacity to provide person-centered, trauma-informed based services to Holocaust survivors. And we do this through trainings like the webinar that you're on now, and we're also in the midst of developing a resource website, which will be launched in the early fall. It's geared towards service providers who want to make their agencies and direct service more person-centered and trauma-informed. The last goal of our agency is to advance person-centered, trauma-informed care in the broader aging services network to older adults. So at this time, I just want to ask you all to please mute your lines, and we will have time for questions later in the call, and you'll get directions of how to do that. The goals of the webinar today are that we will ensure participants know what person-centered trauma-informed care is, what it means to provide person-centered trauma-informed care, how technology can reduce social isolation in older adults, and also we're going to have experts share multiple examples of how survivors are benefiting from technology programs. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Michael Eisinger, to give you a little bit of background on the logistics.
Hi. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Sorry about our technical issues. So we have muted everyone on the line. If you unmute yourself, please remute yourself if you're a participant. It makes it hard, especially if you have background noise for us to hear the presenters. You are welcome to ask questions in the chat box. There's a little icon for a chat window, and you can click and it'll pop up a little window for chatting. And if it says to everyone, you are fine to write your questions. We will have a Q&A segment. We'll be logging all of your questions, and we'll answer as many as time allows. At the end of the webinar, you will receive detailed instructions on how to earn continuing education units, CEUs. We were accredited by NASW to provide CEUs for this webinar. And following information about how to do CEUs, we will have information for our cohort, the group that we are funding, on how to prove that they attended the webinar. There's a code that they'll need to go and enter. So please stay tuned at the end for that important information.
I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the Administration for Community Living and private philanthropy that funds us, and also our partnerships with Claims Conference and the Network of Jewish Human Service Agencies for their support. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're first going to talk about what is person-centered trauma-informed care. And this is really important, especially for those of you who are earning CEUs. There will be a quiz at the end of this, and so this is one of the questions that will be on the quiz. Person-centered trauma-informed care is a holistic approach to the service provision that promotes the dignity, strength, and empowerment of trauma victims by incorporating knowledge about the role of trauma in the victims' lives into agency programs, policies, and procedures. So really, the person-centered approach is where we take the person into account. We don't say patient because that's such a clinical way of looking at someone, and also it's not a diagnosis that we're looking at, it's the individual, and we're taking into account their wraparound needs. So in this case, we are focusing on serving Holocaust survivors, and their histories number as many as they are in number, but there are some frequent commonalities. So one commonality is that many survivors lost some or all of their family members. Parents, they've never often seen grandparents, so have no example of how to age. Also, sometimes their siblings or children. Many who did survive ended up getting scattered from their families and have family members who live in other continents. Also, at this point in life, many of the Holocaust survivors have outlived their friends and support systems, and sometimes their spouses and even their children in some cases. So for all of these reasons, Holocaust survivors are uniquely at risk for social isolation, as are, of course, many older adults. Technology is one tool to reduce social isolation. So as I was walking to work today, I was talking to a friend of mine who thought, well, so technology, often people get so wrapped up in their devices and that they feel disconnected through them. I think that can be the case. However, with older adults, where many of them are homebound, it's really a lifeline for many of them to be able to communicate with others, other people. So we end up, through these programs, although YouTube and other platforms can be used therapeutically for survivors to listen to music from their youth or read current events or create legacy stories, social isolation is really reduced and improved through interaction with others. So tools, internet tools that foster interaction are email and Facebook and video chatting and even Skype. We've seen our Holocaust survivors use. And you're going to hear stories about how agencies have implemented these programs. So one thing to keep in mind when implementing a technology program effectively is you're going to need to ensure that programming is culturally competent, that you have in mind the population that you're serving. So one thing, for example, with Holocaust survivors is establishing trust takes a while, and it's critical in order to have an effective program. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Also, to allow the survivor to share or not to share their personal information or history, and have it be at his or her own discretion and timeline. Also, to listen actively, but not to prod with questions, it is something else to keep in mind. So 2 of the 3 of our presenters have a strong focus on serving clients who are Holocaust survivors from the former Soviet Union. And one thing that they're mindful of, as you'll notice, is that a lot of the Russian-speaking Holocaust survivors immigrated to the United States later in life and often had to learn English as an older adult or may not have learned English at all. So having Russian language platforms for them is very useful, as is having translated curriculums. Another thing that many have found useful is to have Russian-speaking instructors or volunteers in order to make this program successful. So with that, we're going to hear from 3 different organizations that have implemented some of the most innovative programming I've seen in using technology. First, I'd like to introduce Kimberly Brensteiner. She works at Older Adults Technology Services, which OATS is the abbreviation. She's the Director of Programs and oversees planning and implementation of OATS program activities that support older adults. She does many different things, such as developing training curriculum, programs at the Senior Planet Exploration Center, which we'll hear more about, and she also heads OATS consulting branch and works alongside nonprofit, government, and corporate partners to help them more effectively design and implement programs to support older adults. So with that, Kimberly, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for being on this webinar. We can advance to the next slide. So I'm really fortunate to be a part of this today because I get to combine two of my professional experiences working with Holocaust survivors and technology. So thank you for the introduction. I am the Director of Programs at OATS, Older Adults Technology Services, and we're a nonprofit based in New York City, but slowly branching out into other pockets around the country. We were founded in 2004 as a primarily training-based organization where we developed curriculum and went into community sites to do technology programs for seniors. Over the course of time, we started to realize that the things that we were teaching weren't really about technology. We were really helping older adults age better through the use of technology, and the mission shifted from a focus on technology to really focus on aging. Our mission was rewritten, and it's to harness the power of technology to change the way we age. In my previous life, which I get to combine in this webinar, I was the Director of Programs for an Austrian-based Holocaust education program. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our work today. In my role now, I'm often a cheerleader to organizations like the ones you're coming to us from today to talk about how to incorporate technology programs for older people, from where to start to what are effective best practices. So I'm going to get to talk to you about one very accidental program and one very purposeful program that was designed to combat social isolation and incorporated Holocaust survivors. So next slide, please. So OATS runs the Senior Planet Exploration Center in New York City. We get about 15,000 visits a year. Also an exploration center in Plattsburgh, New York, up near the border of Canada in a very rural area. We have 23 labs around New York City and work with many partners to deliver technology programs in areas of health and wellness, creative expression, lifelong learning, social engagement, and civic engagement and advocacy. Next slide. So today we wanted to talk about what's at stake. So when organizations or individuals think about working with survivors and using technology, the first question is, well, is it worth it? What are they missing? People have lived a long time without it in many cases. So what's at stake and what's to gain? So we look at technology use as the real opportunity to reduce social isolation in older adults. We want to create meaningful relationships and connections that cross boundaries that are very real in terms of people who are physically at home, and also emotional and psychological boundaries. Technology can reduce barriers and help people feel empowered. And I have 15 years worth of stories to tell you, and I will try to keep those limited to a few today. Next slide. So this slide is titled Lessons from the Field, A Letter to the Stars. This is the Austrian education program that I mentioned. It started in 2002 by two journalists who were given the list of the last known victims of the Holocaust in Austria, and they had the idea to put it on a website and open the website as a searchable database for school children to find the names of people to research their biographies. This was a long time ago when not a lot of schools were using the internet. Nobody quite knew what would happen. 10,000 students signed up within the first few months of the program and started doing research about people who had lived in their homes or attended their schools or came from their villages. And as that grew, the children started reaching out to family members that they found around the world who had survived. And they sent them emails and they responded. And what could have never been planned was the overwhelming response from survivors around the world and the openness to start entering these pen pal relationships. So the focus shifted from a legacy and kind of memorial project to a project involving thousands of living people that were working to build projects of memory and legacy together using new technology. And the technology at the time, most of us can remember 2002, 2003, even Skype was usually not an option. For anyone, video chat was in its infancy. This was mostly emails and scanned photos. But this project is a case study that I can tell you about for all its imperfections. We had thousands of survivors from all over the world who participated, hundreds of school children, or tens of thousands of school children and hundreds of schools and teachers. Next slide. So over the course of 5 years, the students who had written to survivors started participating in a formal program to document their histories. So they were given tasks to write a book for the website, and they were engaging in communications with survivors to ask them piece by piece over the course of a year or a semester about their life stories, about their memories of their childhood, of their school days, not just about the atrocities they'd seen, but really about their lives. They shared experiences and stories, and the back and forth through technology to created such intimate relationships that many of them started visiting each other in person, traveling. The Austrian students and their families and teachers traveled to Israel and London, New York, Australia to visit the survivors in person. And many of the survivors started returning to Austria, many for the first time. The book on the left is one of the 3 books that were published that were compilations of the students and teachers and survivors work together. Next slide. So the woman pictured on the top left is Stella Hirschon. Her student and teacher are pictured below her. She was a writer living in the West Village in New York City, homebound. She was born in 1915, so she was already in her 90s. She had fled Vienna with a young child who was also part of the program, and she communicated exclusively through technology, impatient to get the letters from her students. She enlisted me personally for help. I was a graduate student at the time, close by, and I started visiting her, helping, change a printer cartridge or send an email. And when Facebook came out, she wanted to use Facebook. So I got a really hands-on training from an incredible woman about technology, but I sensed through our interaction the urgency she had to communicate with her student and teachers, to document her stories, to share things about New York, and the way she coached and built a very personal relationship. And through all of this through email and sending photos and stories back and forth. Next slide. So part of the project, because often when people design intergenerational programs with teenagers especially, it's very easy to just flip the model and have the students act as teachers for technology and the survivors or the older people be passive recipients to learning. In our experience and through this project and the next 15 years, that is a really nice program, but it's not as powerful as when both the older people and the younger people have specific tasks that they work on together. So these signs are in German, but what they are the testimonies from 2 of the survivors that they created in an art project with their students to have a testament for what they wanted to share with the youth of Austria. Next slide. So the picture here was in 2008. The relationships that had developed over 5 years through these pen pal exchanges became so powerful that in 2008, over 500 survivors came to Austria to meet their students in person and speak at their schools and attend commemorative events. You can see there were the survivors in the front. There's a stage that they're looking at, and there were over 10,000 school children there that day. Next slide. This is one example of another relationship. Barbara is the student. She's now a nurse, and Renee is a survivor who did not use internet and email, but they corresponded in a traditional pen pal experience. What happened was that her student used a lot of technology and was able to scan in photos that Renee had taken with her through the war as a resistance fighter. Renee's home burned down a few years ago, and all that was left that she had were the scanned photos from her student. Many of those are now in an app that's used in Austria in a national Holocaust education program. None had existed at the time of this project, but since then, one of the students has created a beautiful app that traces the stories of many of the survivors, including Renee, documents their life stories and photos and memories and their travels, and is now available to schools throughout Austria. Next slide. And the final story I wanted to let you know, the impact of both students and survivors is the young woman pictured here. Lily was 11 years old when the program started. She's since finished her master's and has published a book on the Kindertransport. That was the program that allowed Austrian and German youth to be able to flee to families in mostly in around England. And she's become a top expert and researcher on that subject, and has many friends around the world that are part of Kindertransport and have taken part in programs. Next slide. And the woman picture, she, through this program, decided she wanted to correspond with younger people, and she spent the time during the program trying to wait for snail mail to come, and got tired of that and was determined to learn a computer. Soon after learning the computer for emails, she became homebound completely and was able to continue corresponding. The quote from her says she has friends all over Europe, and she has 12 emails in 3 languages waiting to be answered. And I included this as a long quote, and at the end she said, "It also lets me face my young friends, and I have a lot of them, as an up-to-date equal." And this is an example of someone who is really a bridge between a program that was a Holocaust survivor-oriented program and one that really explains how valuable technology use can be for any older adults, and how important it is and how possible it is for them to learn. So next slide. So some of the lessons from this project is that technology is a great instigator. The program that was invented very grassroots and changed each year as people started participating was really breaking all the rules. It broke the rules that children and survivors who had never had contact or never would have otherwise talked to each other and worked on programs. It got people to start using the internet and technology that never would have otherwise. It created beautiful, documents and lives of these exchanges that nobody had anticipated. There were often, we were told that we would not find 5 Holocaust survivors to return to Austria to speak to schools, and over 500 were able to come. So it shows that the technology programs are powerful enough to really change people's orientation and perceptions of themselves in the world. Technology can level the playing field. So older adults who are not using technology today are at a disadvantage. And they're not often treated as equals in terms of what they're thinking or feeling. And when they're able to communicate through technology, they feel a sense of empowerment and a sense of agency, and like they're part of the world. It also encourages future-oriented thinking. So when we think about Holocaust and legacy and memory, the point is not to have people revisit their memories and not think about the future and things they care about, causes and organizations. So the example I have on the right is the Kindertransport Association's website. They're very active in terms of technology and video, and they use the internet and do classes to teach the members how to search for the organizations that they want to support in terms of supporting refugee children today. And that's an example of how survivors themselves have used technology to empower themselves and be more active agents. Next slide. So some of the best practices from OATS, from Older Adults Technology Services, and this program that really cross each other are that technology has to be used as a path to impact. Technology programs that are about the technology themselves are rarely successful. The point is to have a goal or an idea or a project that people want to work on and learn the skills along the way. OATS encourages the use of mainstream devices and apps whenever possible, because we want to make sure that people who are choosing to interact online have access to the best equipment, but also the widest net of people that they can communicate with. When we do programs, we try to have age-relevant content to make sure that the skills that we're learning are relevant and helpful to older people. And we make sure that the design is created with the seniors in mind and talks to them as a back and forth. These types of senior-centric design means you can't just take a book that is for, new immigrants from a library in Excel and give that to a senior and expect it to be as effective. People have different goals and needs and paces of learning that can be taken into account for more successful program design. And we really think about at OATS of having assessments and metrics for the outcomes. So we don't test for skills, and there's just a note about having more trauma-informed programs is that a lot of people, certainly all Holocaust survivors that are alive today. And Leah was speaking about, I mean, the Russian survivors who are here had their education interrupted at some point. And the fear and the anxiety around learning that people carry from that shouldn't be underestimated. And it's important to help measure people and meet them where they start and where they are at in life, and measure the growth and measure the change, not to test or to have people relive an experience from school time or their anxiety about not having had a positive or a full school experience, and make sure that they feel that they're met where they are and are encouraged to grow. Next slide.
Let's go to charge me.
So the program that was a very purposefully designed program, unlike the wonderful accidental program of A Letter to the Stars, is a program called Connecting to Community that Oates designed as a 6-month intervention for socially isolated, low-income older adults. We worked with volunteer instructors, and we used technology and internet connectivity in the home to combat social isolation. The challenge was given by AARP Foundation, and we were charged to use technology, devices, and volunteers and do something about social isolation, given the back of an envelope, to design a very special program. Next slide. So in this program, we first said, okay, well, we want to combat social isolation. What does this mean? How do you measure it? And there are measures of academic measures and standards for loneliness, like the UCLA index, but there was no standard tool to assess or measure social isolation in older adults. So we worked with researchers from Cornell University and experts around the world to design an assessment tool that could really look at what social isolation means and the different ways you can impact it. So social isolation is not just lack of contact to friends and family. There's subjective social isolation and objective social isolation. So there's frequency of contact, but there's also feelings of being isolated. We look at social support networks and emotional support networks. We look at frequency of social interactions. We look at people's self-esteem, their sense of place and being in the world, social well-being and belonging in society. And we hear time and time again, and measurements prove that people who are socially isolated are often very much left out because the conversations that everyone else are having are online. They're not part of the same types of social milieus as the rest of the people are who are actively using the internet. Next step. So this program took 155 older adults in Washington, D.C. and Sioux Falls, South Dakota through 6 months of volunteer-led instruction in small groups where they learned how to use an iPad step by step, and every step took them through a way to use the iPad for social connectedness. So the very first class, they took pictures of each other and saved them on the screen as their support network through the class. Then they started building a contact list of personal contacts, friends and family, neighbors, community helpers, social workers, doctors, anyone they felt comfortable communicating with. And over the course of 6 months, started using all kinds of social media. They wrote blogs about their experiences. They connected not only to friends and family, but causes that they cared for, be it religious communities or advocacy groups, animal rights agencies, and the such. Next slide.
Hi, Kim. If you have time, I think we're going to go to the lessons learned, if you don't mind.
Perfect. So we want to make sure that that when you're designing programs for older adults in technology, you want to define the change you seek. So just showing somebody an iPad is a nice experience for one time, but to do a sustained, impactful program, you really want to think about how you want the person to use the technology, how they want to use the technology, and find out paths to get them there. It's important to measure change to hold yourselves accountable as service providers, and also to show the survivors and the older adults that you're working with their progress. When you think about how you want to measure the metrics and what you actually want to change, if the goal is to have people connect directly to friends and family or have more of a place that they can exercise advocacy work, you want to design a program around that. moving the needle is not easy. These programs take a lot of time, and I don't, I mentioned 5 years and 2 years and 6 months to really see impactful social change, especially with people who are survivors of trauma or who are in difficult situations. It's important to build trust slowly and to build skills slowly. And I can't stress enough how important it is to really take these projects with the time that is going to be the most helpful for everybody. Organizational capacity is the weakest link. So when people make promises that they can't keep, or something doesn't function as somebody expects, that can really, really set a program off wrong. So it's important to be as prepared as possible and really make sure that expectations are clear and that people know that they feel trusted and respected in the situation. That change is possible and measurable when you're working with social isolation and with Holocaust survivors in all kinds of ways. And you want to make sure that you balance the structure and flexibility when you introduce people to technology and programs, but you want to leave room for magic. And the magic is the actual people you're working with themselves. It's your volunteer instructors or your trainers. It's the survivors and the creative outlets that they find using technology, and to make sure you find ways to celebrate and showcase all of that magic along the way. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for presenting, Kimberly.
And just a reminder, I know we have some people, we resolved our technical issues, so we've had a lot of new people add. Please mute your line. If you're joining us, only the presenter should be heard. And then have any questions, please type them in the group chat, and we will get to them at the end during the Q&A section.
With that, I'd like to introduce David Dring from Self-Help Community Services and Miriam as well from Self-Help Community Services. David is the Executive Director of Self-Help Innovations at Self-Help Community Services. He's a renowned expert recognized for developing innovative technology products designed to improve the lives of older adults. And Miriam is the Programs Director at Self-Help Community Services. She manages the Russian Holocaust Survivors Services Program. With that, David and Miriam.
Thank you very much, Leah. So today we're talking a little bit about the ways that we've looked at addressing socialization through technology. Self-Help created a specific program called the Virtual Senior Center, which I'd like to talk a little bit about, and then Miriam will talk about the ways in which we use the Virtual Senior Center, specifically a Russian version of the platform as a project that we did for a Russian community across New York City. So next slide, please. So just to give you a little sense of who Self-Help is, Self-Help has been around for 81 years. It was created as people were leaving war-torn Europe, looking to settle in the United States. Self-Help gathered together a group of people who could help those who were fleeing Nazi war-torn Europe to resettle in the United States. Since that time, Self-Help has evolved in serving a whole host of older adults who have been marginalized or are living in some sort of vulnerable situation. Self-Help continues to serve about 5,000 Holocaust survivors and then about 15,000 other older adults who have some form of vulnerability. We provide services in Norks. We actually serve 11 affordable housing projects that Self-Help owns and manages and provides a service known as Housing with Services. We run 5 senior centers in New York City and 3 case management programs, as well as an information referral program called New York Connects. We run community guardianship, where people who have been identified as not being able to take care of themselves any longer, we can help them do bill paying, and we can help make both financial and health decisions on their behalf. We run a Self-Help Alzheimer's resource program. We provide geriatric care management, and we provide a very large home care program that serves people all the way from training aides to aid program, as well as skilled nursing program. And A NORC is a naturally occurring retirement community. So basically, when somebody has lived in a building, that happens a lot in New York City where buildings are rent controlled, people move in and they don't leave. And then the majority of the people in the building become over 60. They can be established as a NORC, and social services can be provided to them to help them live and stay aging in place. So if you can go to the next slide. So when we began thinking about the ways in which we could use technology to advance a particular problem, social isolation was presented to us as an issue. And just to kind of give you some frame of reference in terms of how challenging and how much of a significant health issue it is, there was an interview of the U.S. Surgeon General who stated that the greatest health crisis isn't cancer or heart disease, it's actually isolation. And then the number of people who are isolated has doubled to nearly 40%, and 48% of socially isolated seniors anticipate needing help in terms of being able to meet their community needs. If you could go to the next slide. So some of the negative consequences of social isolation are disrupted sleep patterns, which can lead to greater anxiety, leads to depression, greater feelings of depression in terms of not allowing the body to restore itself. It can lead to behavioral problems for people with dementia, altered immune systems, so that people who are having a health issue, a chronic disease condition, can experience greater negative health consequences. More inflammation, a significant challenge for people with congestive heart failure, higher levels of stress hormones, really addresses and increases people's sense of anxiety. And then the risks of heart disease are increased by 29%, and the challenge of stroke, or the prevalence of stroke, is increased by 32%, found of those people who are found to be socially isolated. If you go to the next slide. So the Virtual Senior Center was created as a service using technology to connect homebound older adults who were socially isolated with each other. We started out with an all-in-one computer, which you can see here. It looks pretty much like a large monitor. It's touchscreen, and you can see here a class that is currently happening, and you can be able to see all the different participants in the classroom. Excuse me. It's very important for us that the older adults are able to see each other. A amount of communication, somewhere in the 50 to 60%, is actually derived through body language. So when you tell a joke and you notice someone roll their eyes or they laugh, you can actually experience that as a greater level of connectedness, and that greater level of connectedness leads to better and deeper relationships with people that is difficult to happen over just a telephone-based system. So if you could go to the next slide. So the Virtual Senior Center really is a connection to peers. We build a community. We provide online education through interactive live programs. We've curated and we can individualize internet links for folks. We have brain fitness oriented and social games, and it's all designed in a simplified, senior friendly interface. And as Kim was mentioning before, people learn at their own paces, but at times some people need a little extra help, and we are available to provide that to our participants through telephonic support, and actually connect into their computer, take it over so that we can model for them behaviors that they can do on the site, and then we can watch them do them themselves and provide coaching to them. When we started this program, we weren't able to find anything that was available on the the open market. So we actually created the interface that we use. You can see it here in this image. We have on the left-hand navigation access with large buttons, and sort of thinking about people being able to touch the screen, to the home button, which includes a banner message to provide people with information about what's coming up that particular day or things that they should be thinking about. Today's schedule, which are all the classes that are available on that day. And the join class button, which provides a link to access that actual class. We provide information about the weather to give them some semblance of what's happening in their own community, or they can set that up for their family that may be somewhere else. And it's an interesting way of creating a talking point among family. As you can see, we use Skype as a method to be able to facilitate communication between family and friends, as well as within participants in the program. The internet links be individualized for that particular person. We create an email account for each of the participants, and we have games that people are able to access. As we've mentioned earlier, that the games and the internet links are, or excuse me, the games specifically are brain fitness oriented, and that we've created some social games where we actually allow people to see, hear, and talk with each other as they're playing the card game, which essentially sets it up as if they were in their own living room. And I see a question from someone that would they be able to allow survivors to participate in the virtual senior center outside of New York, and that's certainly possible. The next slide, please. So this is just an example of the classes that are offered. You can see that there's a whole host of classes that are offered in any given week. The classes range, the number of classes range from 40 to 60. They include memories classes, weight training, trivia, exercise, nutrition programs. We have geriatricians who run programs for us. We have meditation and breath, chair yoga. Often we have museums that provide a special class for us about an open exhibit that's happening. We do cooking classes. We have facilitators who participate in our program for us from far away as Australia and Brazil. All they need to have is an internet connection, and they can be a part of our program. So the next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, that the classes really are at the core of what we offer. It's really where people are able to build their socialization, because they can talk with the facilitator, talk with each other on a particular topic, and really are able to engage with each other as a shared experience. And these just provide us some of the statistics of the classes that we offer. And as we mentioned, we do offer classes in Russian, as well as Mandarin, and soon to be offering it in Spanish. The next slide, please. So we've done some studies. Kim was talking about it, how important it is to be able to measure the impact of what you're doing. We've been able to find through an independent evaluation that we reduce social isolation by up to 80%. We increased people's sense of connectedness by 60%, and we improved health status, which is one of those interesting elements in terms of whether or not you are able to consume health resources. But if you could go ahead to the next slide, and we can talk a little bit more about the Russian program. Miriam? Oops. If you go back one. Miriam, are you there? You did take yourself off mute. I'm not hearing Miriam, so I'm just going to keep talking a little bit about our Russian program. This is one particular client who lived in a concentration camp, had a horrible situation, didn't speak English very well. So when we made available the Russian program, they were able to join the class. And just to kind of give you an example of the type of participants who were in the Russian program. If you jump to the next slide. So Russian Holocaust survivors didn't necessarily be in camps, but they were equally traumatized. They were survivors of the Holocaust, and then they experienced systematic anti-Semitism for years inside Russia, suffering chronic depression, PTSD, anxiety, sleep disorders, and then Self-Help provides services, psychosocial service assessments, assistance with benefits and entitlements, reparation benefits, home care, housekeeping, legal and financial assistance, a whole wide of support is provided to the Holocaust survivors in our Russian program. If you jump to the next slide.
David, thank you so much for your presentation, and we're really glad that you were able to show us on the screen right here what your Russian language program looks like, and we appreciate all the information you shared. We're going to go ahead and go introduce the Jewish Family Service of Greater Cincinnati. I want to introduce Edie Dine, who is the Program Assistant for Aging and Caregiver Services, and she plans and coordinates programs for Holocaust survivors. Elena is the, she also works for the Jewish Family Service of Greater Cincinnati. She works on the technology program as a specialist in the Center for Holocaust Survivors. She has a master's degree in teaching from the State University in Russia. So with that, Cincinnati, you're on. Edie and Elena? If you want to unmute your lines. At this time, I just wanted to bring to your attention that because we had such technical difficulties at the beginning of the call, and then, yes, we do, Edie. And because we had such technical difficulties, we're going to continue on the webinar past time for those of you who are trying to earn CEUs. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and we'll tell you more about that in a minute. In the meantime, Edie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. We are here Cincinnati, a Jewish Family Service. We're teaching survivors how to use iPads. This will let them connect with their support network, their family, friends, not only in Cincinnati, but out of the country and out of the state. The instructions that we're using is based on curriculum that has been developed by Generations Online, and our instructions include Skype and FaceTime, email, apps, and just general searching of the website, of the internet. The majority of our clients are low-income Russian-speaking survivors, so the entire curriculum has been translated into Russian. The curriculum that we're using from Generations Online is a website. Our translation is a PowerPoint, and so we make paper copies that we give to the participants and to the volunteers to use when they're working with them. Next slide, please. Next, okay. After successfully completing the 10-week program, the participants get to keep the iPad, and they also have a year of free unlimited data. Successful completion of the program, they've signed a contract to say that they'll attend 8 out of 10 of the sessions, and our volunteers keep a 23-point checklist showing that they've learned all the aspects of the iPad, something as simple as turning it on as into using FaceTime. All our volunteers, all our instructors are volunteers, and our volunteers are diverse in age and in language. We have some graduates of the program who are currently volunteers. We've also had some parents do it with their teenage children as volunteers. Next slide. In designing our program, we certainly wanted to keep PCTI in mind. We're certainly aware of survivors' language and cultural preferences, but we're also aware that survivors have trust issues and they're reluctant to join organized groups. So for this reason, our instructions are one-on-one in the privacy of the participant's home. This allows the volunteer not only to be sensitive to the client's preferences, what they want to use in the iPad, but also their own, what they want to learn. So it's really personalized instruction. And as a plus to this, the survivors have developed a relationship with their volunteers. Next slide.
Hello, my name is Elena Eisenberg. I will talk about challenges in our program. The TECH program is an amazing opportunity for seniors to increase their communication with their family members and friends. But working on this program, we encountered some challenges. Our first big challenge was finding Russian-speaking volunteers. The pool of people who speak and read Russian in Cincinnati is not large. Plus, they need to be familiar with using a tablet. In addition to this, they have to be interested in this program and able to commit their time to program, resulting in the pool of volunteers getting even small. For this challenge, we put up flyers at the Russian Educational Center, put up flyers at our local Russian grocery store, and we spoke about the TECH program when the Russian community got together at community events. The other big challenge was getting tablets and data plan that met our program requirements and were in our grant budget. Our requirement for data was unlimited. We did not want people to get cut off in the middle of a Skype or FaceTime session. In other words, we need tablets larger than 10 each, so they would be easier to seniors, many who have age-related vision loss to read on. For this challenge, we did lots of research. We spoke with many different vendors. We checked out every connection staff suggested and used a vendor with government nonprofit division which offered reduced price on iPad and data plans. Let's next slide. Our next challenge was about the age of TECH program participants. In year one, there were more participants who were over 85. These participants had a more difficult time memorizing the material, and these participants took more time to be comfortable with the whole idea of technology. Regarding the participants' age, we modified the program for the second year by adding 2 weeks to the program. We added 1 week in the beginning of the program when basic are covered, and 1 week for FaceTime and Skype. We picked these 2 areas to increase because we knew from previous cohorts these 2 sessions gave our participants the most challenges. After TECH program is over, many participants still have questions about how to use their iPad, which is why we established a tablet consultation twice a month. Please, next one.
I want to thank you so much for your presentation, Cincinnati. We really appreciate your expertise in sharing, especially how to work with Russian speakers and how to be culturally competent. With this, I want to encourage you all to put your questions into the chat box in the corner of your screen. And we will, Michael, do you want to read off any questions that we have so far?
Yes, first we have a quick note, which is that Any of the agencies that were presenting except for Oates were funded through a grant through JFNA, through the Center for Advancing Holocaust Survivor Care. I know there were some questions about how the Russian portal for the Self-Help Senior Center, Virtual Senior Center got funded, and to translate that to Russian, that was funded through a grant in a competitive grant process. So we mentioned that because we just launched a new RFP for a third year of funding. Congress reappropriated funding. So we welcome all proposals that deal with PCTI care. It can be training, it can be technology, anything you can think of. If you can make the case that it is innovative. The intent to apply, which is as simple as providing your contact information, is due July 14th. That's on our website, along with the entire RFP and everything you need. The application is due by August 22nd, and we anticipate making final awards by the end of January, just to give you an idea of our whole timeline. Moving to the next slide. For those who are viewing this in order to get CEUs through NASW, this is the link you will need. You will need to write it down now because we will not provide it to those who were not on the webinar. So if you email us, we can't send this to you. This is our way of knowing whether or not you were in attendance. So the large URL in the center, please write it down now. There is a $25 fee for the webinars, and there you need to, once you pay, it'll auto launch a quiz. That's, I think, 10 questions. And you need to score at least 80% in order to earn the CEUs.
And for those of you who logged on late, we're going to make sure that after this, after the closure of 2:15, that we will make sure that all the answers to the quiz are reviewed for those of you who couldn't log on in time.
And finally, for those who are part of our cohort, who are currently being funded, who are viewing this, we will send you an email with a link to enter this code, and this will verify your participation in the webinar. So please write down this word. We'll send you a JotForms link, and you'll put in your information, grant number, and this passphrase, and that's how we will verify your attendance. And so now we'll go to questions. As Leah said, please write your questions in the chat box. I'm going to scroll up through our nice long chat and start reading off questions. If you have a question for a specific presenter, please indicate that in your question if there's someone specifically you wanted to ask. And if you want more information about the center or what you've seen today or our RFP, you can email holocaustcenter@jewishfederations.org. So let me get up to the top here and find our first question.
And just to reiterate, for the RFP, it's any person-centered trauma-informed care strategy that will benefit Holocaust survivors. And we're hoping that what we learned from this grant can then be applied to other populations. But this grant is specifically for Holocaust survivors.
And the number one question we've had, well, two questions are, one, yes, it will be recorded. Once we've closed the link to CEUs, we will send out a recording as well as the PowerPoint. So we're giving those who are applying for CEUs 2 weeks to pay their fee and take their quiz, and then we will send out the recording as well as the PowerPoint slide. So I know quite a few people are interested in that. We're happy to provide that. Looks like our first question is, can you please share an example of senior-centric design?
Kimberly, are you able to take this question about how the technology programs that you develop at Oates have older adults in mind?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I was answering some of these offline. I wasn't sure how this all works, but a good example is, you know, when we were, a recent program we did was to develop a video series for online banking for older adults. And a bank came to us and asked us for help with that. And we were able to talk to, you know, online banking is kind of the #1 fear for people. It crosses privacy issues and security, and it's intimidating, and it's not a lot of fun. But we were able to develop a really neat program because we talked to you know, we surveyed thousands of people. We have all the information from our instructors. And what we did was develop a program that specifically addressed the most common questions, the most common fears, the most common assumptions, and the most common needs and the most useful ways that older adults can use online banking for different things. So it's a very dry example, but it was a really successful program because every single skill or topic or piece of information was really put intentionally with conversations with seniors themselves, but also with the relevant research and information about designing programs specifically that address the needs for older adults.
Great, thank you. And while we have you, somebody asked, does Oats charge fees for its services?
That's right. So we make sure that all of our programs, the membership at Senior Planet Centers or all of participation in any of our classes are free to the participants. And we work really hard with corporate and foundation and nonprofit, other sponsors to make sure that that's the case.
Wonderful. And somebody asked, is the social isolation measurement tool created by Oats and available as a public resource?
Yes, it's almost there for the general public. So if people want to email me, and soon within the next couple weeks, it's in a final revision to be able to kind of send out there into the world. So I can make that available to JFNA. And also if people email me, we'll make sure that they can get that.
Great. Also, this is a chance for us to plug that we will be launching our resource website in early fall, and we will have a lot of materials related to evaluations on our website.
There we go. Maybe it will just be there. That's an easy answer.
And it looks like somebody answered, chatted back to one of the other members that was watching. Somebody asked, what is a NORC, which is a naturally occurring retirement community. So I'm glad, thank you guys for helping each other out. Our next question, can survivors outside of the self-help service area join the virtual senior center?
David, are you able to take this question?
Absolutely. And the answer is yes. We have participants in the program, in the virtual senior center program from across the country. And we are continually looking for additional funding to be able to expand the number of Russian people in our program.
Wonderful. And while we have you, can you tell us how difficult is it to get instructors to present for the senior center?
We have a full-time staff person who's dedicated to recruiting volunteers for all of our programs, and we work with our Russian Holocaust survivor program to have them tap and connect with people who would be able to facilitate classes in Russian. It is a significant effort. I'm trying to think of a way to measure it. It is, I guess, the easiest to say is not a trivial task. We interview a lot of people. We do test classes with them, as well as provide training for them. So we really look for people who are willing to provide not just a single class, but a series of classes to be able to support the amount of time that we invest in training them to be a great facilitator for the program.
Thank you. We've received quite a few questions, and unfortunately we're short on time. So if you either want to stay on the line past 2:15, we're happy to answer them then. Also, we will be sending out the answers to all these questions when we send out the PowerPoint and a recording of this webinar in 2 weeks. So thank you very much, and feel free to keep on typing your questions in the box, and we will make sure that all of them are answered. At this point, I would like to thank you all for helping us accomplish our goal of transforming the culture of agencies and elevating the quality of care provided by individuals who serve older adults to become more person-centered and trauma-informed. We really appreciate you taking the time to join this call. Also, we're going to send you an invitation to our next webinar, which is going to be on August 3rd. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we will make sure that our technical issues are ironed out before then for sure, on how to make your agencies and direct service more person-centered, trauma-informed. Also, we're going to launch our resource website, which will be in early fall, and you will be emailed a survey after this call, which we would really appreciate you filling out to let us know how we can improve this webinar and ideas for future webinars. So we will stay on the call just a bit longer.
So yes, I'm just going to repeat this again. You see it up on your screen. This is the URL. You need to write it down now. We cannot email you this URL if you misplace it. So write it down, memorize it, whatever you need to do so that then you can go, pay your $25 fee, and then it'll auto launch a quiz for you. And you must score at least 80% on that test in order to then get an email certifying that you have earned the CEU. And in 1 second, I'll give you guys the website, our website. We have some people asking for our web address where they can find the RFP. It's holocaustsurvivorcare.org, and that's where you can find, we'll post future webinars, as well as there's a recording of our first informational call. Anyone interested is welcome to look over the RFP on our website and register for tomorrow's informational call about the RFP and how grants are awarded, et cetera. And then one more time for our cohort, this is the code you will use to prove attendance, and we will email you shortly with a link, and you'll enter this code and your identifying information in to verify attendance.
So with that, we're going to just take one more question, and then if you want to stay on the call, you're welcome to, and we're going to repeat some of what Kimberly had said in the beginning of her presentation, because I'm afraid that due to technical difficulties, many people couldn't join at that point in time.
So just a quick clarification, somebody asked about cohorts. If you are being funded by JFNA, you need that code, right? Whether you are Alpha or Bravo cohort, you need to prove that you attended, as it's a requirement of the grant to attend these webinars. We had a question about, are clients screened in any way to determine their ability to participate in programs like OATS, the Virtual Senior Center, or the iPad program?
So Cincinnati, would you be able to answer the question about whether you screen your clients before they participate in your project? Edie?
I'm sorry, yeah, well, we ensure that they are Holocaust survivors and all the paperwork is up to date. And we are not using, we've had some people who somebody suggested, but we thought maybe they had the beginning of Alzheimer's, and we don't think that's a good match for our program. Does that answer your program? And we want people who are very interested. I mean, actually, we want people who actually are extremely interested. Usually that we've advertised it in our newsletter, and they then respond to it, because we have found that people need to be really interested in doing it. We don't want to have to talk somebody into this. But we have a lot of people who are extremely enthusiastic and want to be part of the program.
That's great.
Give us 1 second. We're going to back up some slides. And go back to OATS presentation for those who missed it.
So I think the very first thing that we talked about, for those of you who were unable to join the call in the beginning, is to hear about person-centered trauma-informed care. You're going to need to know about this in order to complete the quiz. Person-centered trauma-informed care is a holistic approach to service provision that promotes the dignity, strength, and empowerment of trauma victims by incorporating knowledge about the role of trauma in victims' lives into agencies' programs, policies, and procedures. So it's keeping in mind the individual who's in front of you and in consideration the experiences that somebody has endured, and that every individual is going to have different needs. We really have opted to call, or the federal government chose the terminology person-centered versus patient-centered, because it's not a diagnosis and it's not clinical, it's that we're keeping the individuals in mind in all cases. So with that, Kimberly, we're going to have you, if you wouldn't mind, reviewing just some of the highlights of your presentation. And we're putting you on the spot here, I realize.
That's
so
okay.
I appreciate you going with the flow.
Happy to do it. So thanks everyone who stayed on. Sorry you missed the beginning. I'll try to go through quickly. About how much time? Maybe 10 minutes? Or the whole presentation? I'm not sure how long people missed.
Sure. If you want to go ahead and give us about 10 minutes, that would be great.
Okay, no, sounds good. So I'm the Director of Programs from OATS, Older Adults Technology Services. We can do the next slide. We are, there we go. So we're a New York City based nonprofit. We were founded in 2004. We've taught over 35,000 free classes for older adults. We operate the Senior Planet Exploration Center, which is a beautiful retail training and program space in Manhattan, and another one in Plattsburgh, New York, kind of close to the border of Canada in a rural area. We have training labs all around New York City and work with over 100 partners in New York City alone, and we have programs in Montgomery County and some other places. So we can do the next slide. So we want to talk about what's at stake when organizations and people think about working with technology and survivors. You know, there's always an element of risk. We talk about people being re-traumatized or what they would see online or how long it would take to learn. But in our knowledge and 15 years of experience working with survivors and with general older adults around technology, I can just guarantee and be the messenger that the rewards are much greater than the risks. Next slide. So my background, before I came to OATS, I was the program director for an Austrian-based Holocaust education organization called A Letter to the Stars that began as a very grassroots project run by two journalists who wanted to have school children help document the histories of the murdered victims of the Holocaust from Austria. But students, being who they are, started finding survivors and surviving family members that they emailed and wanted to talk to, and spoke with the phone and asked questions about the people who had perished, and started building these very, very important connections. So the organization's mission and focus changed from a documentation project to a really living intergenerational program that connected school children throughout Austria with Austrian Holocaust survivors living all over the world. Over 10,000 students participated in one time or another. It was founded in 2002, and by 2008 we had over 500 Holocaust survivors who actually traveled to Austria to speak with students. Next slide.
Friday, the 14th.
So the relationships between the students and the survivors were intimate enough that they were able to document their histories and their stories. Oh, if someone can take their line, mute their line. Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Thank you. So we had over 200 schools participating, and at the time there was no formal Holocaust education program in Austria. So this really caught on. Over 10,000 students signed up to be part of it during the first year. But what was unprecedented was the willingness of the survivors to respond to the students' inquiries. So over the course of 5 years, hundreds and hundreds of stories, connections were made, these pen pal relationships formed. They were published in 3 different books that were the jointly written stories between the survivors and their students. And then they started visiting each other. So survivors were traveling to Austria and students were traveling to New York, London, Israel to meet with their survivors. Next slide. So these are some examples. There are literally hundreds of stories of people, many of whom I know well. Just in New York City alone, there were over 100 survivor participants that traveled to Austria to speak at the schools. Stella was one woman who I knew very well, and as soon as she started emailing her student, she also wanted to be on Facebook, and she also wanted to publish her memoirs and in 2 languages, and she wanted to have a connection that spanned much beyond the simple exchanges and tasks into something very special. Next slide. The survivors themselves also participated in the technology component by creating their messages to the youth of Austria using photos and quotes and things that were important to them that were displayed in an art exhibit that traveled around the country. Next slide. And in 2008, I mentioned 500 of the survivors came to Austria to meet their students. Most of them traveled to their schools, sometimes the schools they had attended as children. And the reason I'm using this as an example is that the technology was able to be the bridge that no other program or exchanges were ever able to do. So many of the survivors, and speaking from the experience of over 100 in New York, most of them had not ever traveled to Austria, nor had they had a desire. They didn't have connections with their former country in the way that they were able to build through this kind of magic that was created of having young people genuinely interested in the past and interested in their stories, and then forming really close and intimate bonds through the course of the program with the survivors, that many of them called each other family, and they've been parts of each other's lives since then. Next slide.
Kimberly, I'm wondering if you could also focus on what the kinds of programs that OATS does, because
Yes.
I think it's fascinating to hear about your work and the different models of programs that you offer.
Absolutely. So we can kind of slip through because the next were just examples of some of the special relationships that were formed and how critical it was. Also how survivors themselves use technology when they're empowered to do so for advocacy and for connecting to each other, for, everything from learning about latest legislation to really being advocates for other groups of persecuted people. So the next slide into OATS. So OATS develops all of our programs around mainstream technology. We work with anybody who is 60 and up. We don't screen for income. We keep the programs free to make sure, if people are not using technology at this stage, it's really a social problem, not a personal problem. So access to internet, the cost of devices, the lack of ability to find quality training for people, all of these barriers are really in place. And so OATS tries to break these down to make sure that people adopt technology that's useful to them, that they learn at a pace that they feel successful, and they learn the things that are most critical for them to be able to age better in terms of health and wellness, or social engagement, civic engagement, creative expression in lifelong learning, and in financial security. So all of our programs are designed around these content areas to make sure they're as relevant as possible to older adults, and really speak to their needs, both in a methodological standpoint and also in a really philosophical standpoint. We talk openly about issues connected to aging. We know that networks, that friends and family break down, especially when people leave the workforce, but that continues. We know that, officially at least 1 in 5 older adults is defined as socially isolated throughout the country. We believe that to actually be much greater, and that there are ways that technology can help build bridges and break down barriers that really nothing else in our modern society can do. So next slide. So the program we developed called Connecting to Community, and we've revamped as Connect, that uses iPads and trainers and 6 months of training to help connect socially isolated older adults. Next slide. So we wanted to measure social isolation, and only, we established what we want to measure, and then each objective throughout the course taught to those needs. So we talk about social support and emotional support. We help people build their social networks and increase the frequency of social interactions. Talk about self-esteem and social well-being, and not every session has something to do with the technology. One week they actually put down the iPads and they talk about the ways that people communicate. So when people have been socially isolated for a long time, often they're in situations that are very adversarial or aggravating. If the only person they talk to is a pharmacist that doesn't have their prescription in weeks, there's ways to really build up ways to communicate. And then add the digital world to that, people are really learning from scratch how to communicate and how people kind of digital culture, not just about the digital skills. We can do the next slide. So we make sure that we celebrate and publish the research for these kinds of projects so we can share them. So this is an example of a celebration, and this is an example of research. So much effort we know goes into these types of programs. If it's just one person working one-on-one with someone to get them set up with email and able to use it, or if it's a very structured program that teaches hundreds of older adults and works with hundreds of volunteers and thousands of pages of curriculum and all of the money and effort and resources involved, we want to make sure that that information is measured and that it's published and that it's shared. So something that OATS does on an advocacy side is try to participate in situations like this and also make sure that we can help other organizations build their capacity to really work effectively with seniors in technology. And sometimes I feel like in my role, I'm a cheerleader that can go to community-based organizations or social service agencies to cheer them on, to talk about where to start. It's not only the older adults that are intimidated by technology, but it's general. People are anxious about it. If things don't work well, they're expensive. What happens if something breaks? All of these barriers add more barriers that make these programs much harder than they should be. So any resources we can lend as an organization, we'll be happy to do that and try to find a way to communicate these best practices. And the next slide, and then maybe I can open to questions. We really think about measuring what we're trying to achieve. So when we look at, financial security for older adults, we look at the specific population we're working with. For example, for a housing development in New York City, we look at the general demographics and the needs, the household budgets, what resources are available in the community, and also think about fun ways that are valuable to build in. So not only are people doing household budgets, they're also learning about the sharing economy and how they can benefit or not from that, and things that are part of our common vernacular, but older adults are really excluded from when they're not participating online. So it's very important to think about, certainly with person-centered program design anyhow, as you think about the audience and what goals they can achieve, and then the tools and how you get there are secondary. So sometimes we'll use an iPad for a class, and sometimes it's a PC. If someone needs workforce skills, an iPad is not going to be as helpful as a traditional kind of workstation. But if somebody is interested in taking pictures and just looking through Facebook or doing Skype or FaceTime with friends and family, a tablet might be a great option. So we really try to think about the person and the needs before we think about the technology in every case.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. You get a gold medal for doing your presentation 2 times. We really appreciate your help, and we also really appreciate the time of everybody who has stayed on the webinar and has been patient throughout. On the screen now, you will see the link that you can click to in order to pay your $25 fee to earn CEUs, and also immediately after you pay your fee, you will be given a test that is required to pass at least with 80%. So we wish you the best of luck, and we thank you very much for your time and participating on this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.